The clatter of plates and murmur of conversations filled Bellini's, the upscale Italian restaurant where I'd been waiting tables for the past 8 months. My feet ached in the regulation black heels, each step a reminder of the double shift I was pulling. The scent of garlic and basil hung in the air, usually comforting, but tonight it clung to my skin like a reminder of where I belonged, serving others while barely keeping my own life together. Table 7 needs their check, and 9 just got seated. Marco, the floor manager, barked as he passed, not bothering to wait for my acknowledgement. I nodded anyway, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. My reflection in the polished silver service tray showed dark circles under my eyes that even my careful makeup couldn't fully conceal. 28 years old and already exhausted by life. This wasn't how I'd imagined things would turn out when I moved to the city 5 years ago with dreams of finishing my nursing degree. The weight of my phone in my apron pocket felt heavier than usual. 3 missed calls from the hospital billing department. My mother's cancer treatments weren't covered by insurance, and the payment plan I'd negotiated was already behind. 1 more month, and they might stop her treatment altogether. I approached table 9 with my practiced smile, the one that didn't quite reach my eyes but was convincing enough to secure decent tips. The table was situated in the far corner of the restaurant, partially obscured by a decorative partition adorned with climbing ivy. It was the most private table in the house, usually reserved for couples or important guests. The first thing I noticed was the child. A boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with dark curls and eyes red-rimmed from crying. He sat rigidly in his chair, small shoulders hunched forward, occasionally sniffling as he stared down at the table. Across from him sat a man I couldn't quite see, just the outline of broad shoulders beneath what appeared to be an expensive suit. "Good evening and welcome to Bellini's," I began, my voice taking on the warm, professional tone I'd perfected. "My name is Sophia, and I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" That's when the man shifted, leaning into the golden light cast by the wall sconce. My words faltered as I took him in. Impossibly handsome in a dangerous way, with sharp cheekbones and eyes so dark they appeared black in the dim lighting. His suit wasn't just expensive, it was exquisitely tailored to his frame, the kind of clothing I'd only ever seen in magazines. A heavy watch glinted on his wrist as he absently stroked a signet ring on his left hand. But what struck me most was how everyone around him seemed to fade into the background, as if he commanded all the light and air in the room. 2 men in dark suits sat at a nearby table, not eating, their attention constantly scanning the restaurant before returning to our corner. "Water for now," he said, his voice surprisingly soft with a slight accent I couldn't place. "And something sweet for the boy." He didn't look at me as he spoke, his attention focused entirely on the child. The boy's lower lip trembled as a fresh tear slid down his cheek. "Is everything all right?" I asked before I could stop myself, looking at the child with concern. The man's gaze snapped to mine, and I felt a chill race down my spine. Not from fear exactly, but from the intensity of his focus, as if I'd suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. "No," he said simply. "It is not." I should have nodded and retreated to get their drinks. That's what the job required. That's what safety demanded when faced with a man who clearly occupied a different world than mine. But the boy's quiet sniffling pulled at something in me. Kneeling down to the child's eye level, I smiled gently. "Hey there, my name's Sophia. What's yours?" The boy glanced up at the man, as if seeking permission to speak. After receiving an almost imperceptible nod, he whispered, "Marco." "That's a wonderful name," I said, reaching into my apron pocket. "You know, Marco, I have something special for brave boys like you." I pulled out a small paper crane I'd folded during my break. It was a habit I'd developed during the long hours at my mother's hospital bedside, creating something beautiful from nothing but a square of paper. Marco's eyes widened slightly as I placed the crane on the table before him. "If you hold it in your hands and make a wish," I whispered conspiratorially. "Sometimes the wish comes true." A flicker of something, wonder, perhaps, crossed his face as he carefully picked up the paper bird. "Can I get you some ice cream while you think about what you'd like for dinner?" I asked, straightening up but keeping my voice gentle. Marco nodded, the faintest ghost of a smile appearing on his lips. When I looked back at the man, I found him watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between surprise and calculation. as if I were a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. "Chocolate," he said after a moment. "Bring him chocolate ice cream." I nodded and turned to leave, feeling his eyes on my back with each step. At the service station, Marco the manager intercepted me. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, gripping my elbow hard enough to leave marks. "Getting ice cream for a customer?" I replied, confused by his reaction. "Do you have any idea who that is?" His face had gone pale, a sheen of sweat appearing on his upper lip. I shook my head. "That's Alessio Vitale," he whispered, as if even saying the name too loudly might summon something terrible. The name meant nothing to me, but the fear in Marco's eyes told me it should. "He owns half the city," Marco continued, loosening his grip on my arm. "The parts that don't show up in tourist brochures. Don't engage with him. Don't look at him too long. Just serve and get out. Understand?" I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach. I'd heard whispers about the families that controlled the city's underworld. Drugs, gambling, protection rackets. But they'd always seemed like urban myths, stories told to scare newcomers. "And Sophia?" Marco added as I turned away. "For God's sake, don't do anything stupid." I returned to the table with chocolate ice cream for the boy and water for Mr. Vitale, my hands remarkably steady despite the warnings echoing in my head. The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the dessert, but he waited, looking at the man across from him. "Go ahead, Marco," Alessio said, his voice gentler than before. As the child began to eat, Alessio's attention turned fully to me. "You're good with children," he observed. "I like them," I replied simply, feeling somehow that honesty was important with this man. They see the world differently than we do. "And how do you see the world, Sophia?" My name in his mouth sounded different, almost intimate, and I wondered when I'd introduced myself. Had he read my name tag? Or had he already known who I was? "As a series of shifts and bills," I answered with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Not very poetic, I'm afraid." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. Honesty is its own poetry. The conversation was surreal, standing in the hushed corner of the restaurant, with a man who apparently controlled half the city's shadows, discussing poetry while a child ate ice cream between us. "Will there be anything else?" I asked, trying to regain my professional demeanor. "He needs a mother's love," Alessio said abruptly, nodding toward the boy, who was now focused entirely on his ice cream. "His father was one of my men, killed 3 days ago. His mother died in childbirth." I blinked, startled by the sudden confidential turn. "I'm sorry," I said, because what else could one say to such a revelation? "Does he have other family?" Alessio's gaze was penetrating, as if he could see through my skin to the fears and dreams beneath. "No, he has me now. I take care of my people, Sophia, always." He said it like a vow, like something carved in stone. I should have walked away then, should have maintained the boundary between server and customer. But the boy, Marco, looked up at me with chocolate around his mouth, and eyes that had seen too much loss for someone so small, and I found myself reaching for a napkin to gently wipe his face. "There you go," I said softly. "Much better." When I looked up, Alessio was watching my hands with an intensity that made my skin prickle, not with fear, but with something else I didn't want to name. "We'll have the special," he said, never looking at the menu. "And bring another portion for yourself. Join us." It wasn't a request. I'd been in the service industry long enough to recognize when someone was used to being obeyed without question. "I'm working," I said, the words coming out more firmly than I expected. "But thank you." His eyebrow arched slightly, perhaps unused to refusal in any form. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Just a slight curve of his lips, but it transformed his face from merely handsome to devastating. "When do you finish?" The question hung between us, loaded with implication. I knew I should make an excuse, any excuse, but found myself answering truthfully instead. "Midnight." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "We'll wait." "That's not necessary." It wasn't a question, Sophia. His tone remained gentle, but there was steel beneath it. I retreated to place their order, my mind racing. Marco the manager watched me with increasing alarm as I moved through the restaurant, as if expecting me to collapse under the pressure of serving Alessio Vitale. The night progressed in a surreal haze. I served other tables, took orders, delivered food, all while acutely aware of the dark eyes tracking my movements from the corner table. The boy, Marco, seemed to relax as the evening wore on, occasionally looking up at me when I passed with something like hope in his eyes. By 11, the restaurant had nearly emptied. My feet screamed in protest as I cleared the last of my tables, knowing I still had closing duties to complete before I could leave. "Go home," Marco the manager said, appearing suddenly beside me as I tallied receipts. "I'll finish your closeout." "What? Why?" He glanced nervously toward Alessio's table, where the man and boy still sat, though their meals were long finished, because he's still waiting, and men like him don't wait for anyone. Especially not waitresses. "I didn't ask him to wait," I protested, indignation flaring. "Doesn't matter," Marco said, taking the receipts from my hand. "Just go. And Sophia, be careful." I changed out of my uniform in the staff bathroom, hands shaking slightly as I pulled on jeans and a simple blue sweater. My reflection showed a woman trying very hard to appear unaffected, but the flush in my cheeks betrayed me. When I emerged, Alessio and the boy were waiting by the front door. The child looked exhausted, his eyelids heavy, but he straightened when he saw me approach. "You kept your crane," I noticed. Seeing the paper bird clutched carefully in his small hand, he nodded solemnly. I made a wish. "Those are secret," Alessio reminded him gently, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Then to me, "My car is outside." Again, not a question. I hesitated. Every warning I'd ever heard about getting into cars with strangers, let alone potential criminals, flashing through my mind. "I need to get home," I said. "I have an early morning tomorrow." "Where do you live?" "West Side," I answered vaguely. "We'll take you." I was about to refuse again when little Marco slipped his hand into mine. His small fingers warm and trusting, the simple gesture undid me. I looked down at his solemn face, then back at Alessio, whose expression had softened almost imperceptibly. "Okay," I agreed, against every instinct for self-preservation. "Thank you." Outside, a sleek black car with tinted windows idled at the curb. One of the men I'd noticed inside the restaurant stood beside it, opening the door as we approached. The night air was crisp with approaching autumn, and I shivered slightly, hugging my worn jacket closer. In one fluid movement, Alessio removed his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The weight of it surprised me, along with the lingering warmth and scent. Expensive cologne with notes of sandalwood and something uniquely him. "I'm fine, really," I protested weakly, even as I resisted the urge to burrow deeper into the luxurious fabric. "You're cold," he stated simply, as if that settled everything. The car's interior was as luxurious as I'd imagined, all soft leather and the subtle glow of ambient lighting. Marco climbed in first, followed by me, with Alessio last, effectively blocking any easy exit. As we pulled away from the curb, I realized I'd just willingly entered the lion's den, with no real understanding of the predator beside me. "Where exactly on the west side?" Alessio asked, his arm stretched behind me along the seat, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I gave my address, trying not to think about what it might mean for this man to know where I lived. The modest apartment building would tell him everything my pride wanted to hide, that I was struggling, that my life was held together by overtime shifts and payment plans. Little Marco yawned beside me, his eyes growing heavier with each passing moment. Without thinking, I adjusted his seatbelt to make him more comfortable, tucking him slightly against my side. He smelled of chocolate ice cream and the faint remnant of tears. "He likes you," Alessio observed, his voice lower now, intimate in the close confines of the car. "Children are good judges of character," I replied, looking down at Marco's dark curls. "So am I." I looked up then, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time. In the passing streetlights, his eyes reflected gold for brief moments before returning to their near black depths. "And what character do you judge me to have, Mr. Vitale?" His lips curved slightly. "Alessio, please. And I think you're someone who carries more than she should, who sees others when most look away." and who makes paper cranes to give hope to crying children. The assessment was too close, too perceptive. I looked away, out the window at the passing city lights, suddenly aware of how intimate this moment felt, trapped in luxury with a man whose reputation apparently terrified my boss. "You're quiet now," he observed after a moment. "I'm trying to figure out why I'm here," I admitted. "Why you waited. Why you're interested in a waitress who folded a paper crane." He was silent long enough that I thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Something raw and honest beneath the polished exterior. "He hasn't spoken since his father died. Not until you knelt beside him with your paper bird and gentle voice." His gaze moved to the now sleeping child between us. "That makes you interesting, Sophia. Very interesting indeed." The car slowed as we approached my building, its shabby exterior illuminated harshly by streetlights. I reached for the door handle, intending to slip out quickly with minimal fuss, but Alessio's hand covered mine, stopping the movement. "Tomorrow," he said. "You don't work." I checked the schedule. A chill ran through me at the casual demonstration of his reach. How many people had he spoken to about me in the few hours since we'd met? "I'll send a car at noon," he continued, as if I hadn't tried to speak, "for you to spend time with Marco. He needs someone who can make him smile." It wasn't a request, but neither did it feel like a command. Something in his voice made it an inevitability, as if the universe itself would bend to ensure I was in that car at noon tomorrow. I should have refused, should have made an excuse about prior commitments. Instead, looking at the sleeping child, I found myself nodding. Alessio's fingers brushed mine as he released my hand, the brief contact sending an electric current up my arm. "Good night, Sophia. Dream well." As I stepped out of the car, his jacket still around my shoulders, I realized my mistake too late. I turned back, intending to return it, but the window lowered just enough for his voice to drift out. "Keep it," he said, "for now." The car pulled away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the weight of his jacket around me and the growing certainty that I'd just made a terrible, wonderful mistake, one that would change everything. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay awake, staring at the water stain on my ceiling that vaguely resembled a bird in flight, while my mind replayed every moment of the evening. Alessio Vitale's jacket hung on the back of my door, its presence both comforting and unsettling, like having a piece of a storm safely contained in my small apartment. When my alarm blared at 7, I'd managed only a few hours of fitful rest. Still, I dragged myself from bed and into the shower, letting the lukewarm water, all my building could manage, wash away the lingering scent of the restaurant. Not his scent, though. That seemed to have permeated my skin somehow. By 8, I was at St. Mary's Hospital, sitting beside my mother's bed as machines beeped a steady rhythm around us. Her face was gaunt, the cancer treatment stealing more of her with each passing week, but her smile when she saw me remained unchanged from my childhood. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said, her voice raspy from the tubes they'd only recently removed. Her fingers, thin and bruised from IV needles, brushed against my cheek. "Just a long shift," I assured her, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "How are you feeling today?" "Better now that you're here." It was her standard response, one that never failed to twist my heart. "Any news on the payment plan?" I forced a smile, pushing down the panic that rose whenever I thought about the mounting bills. "I'm working on it. Don't worry about that now." She saw through me, as she always had. "Sophia, you can't keep—" "I met someone," I blurted, desperate to change the subject, immediately regretting the words as her eyes lit up with hope. "Oh? Tell me everything." "Why, what could I say? That I'd met a man who terrified my boss? Who apparently controlled the city's underworld? Who had waited hours just to offer me a ride home because I'd been kind to a child in his care? It's nothing serious," I backpedaled. "Just someone interesting." I busied myself adjusting her blankets, avoiding her knowing gaze. "Interesting is good," she said, settling back against her pillows. "Interesting can be everything." We spent the next hour talking about safer topics. The nurse she liked, the orderly who snuck her extra pudding cups, the soap opera plot she followed religiously. I read aloud from the dog-eared mystery novel we'd been working through for weeks, careful to use different voices for each character, as I'd done since I was a child reading to her. When visiting hours ended, I kissed her forehead and promised to return tomorrow with fresh flowers for her windowsill. "Be happy, Sophia," she said as I reached the door, "whatever it takes." The words followed me out of the hospital and into the bright autumn morning. Whatever it takes. How far would I go to ensure my mother's care? To pay off the debts that kept me awake at night? The question was no longer hypothetical. Not with a black car scheduled to arrive at my door in 3 hours. At home, I stood before my closet, surveying the meager options. Nothing seemed appropriate for whatever lay ahead. Not the worn jeans and sweaters I lived in, nor the black slacks and button-downs I wore for work. At the back hung a simple blue dress I'd bought on sale 2 years ago for a job interview that hadn't panned out. I'd never worn it, saving it for some special occasion that never materialized. Today felt like a turning point, though I couldn't articulate why. The dress fit better than I remembered, skimming over curves I usually kept hidden beneath practical clothing. I paired it with the only decent shoes I owned, low heels that wouldn't leave my feet screaming after an hour. My hair, usually pulled back for work, I left down, the dark waves falling past my shoulders. At precisely noon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The car is waiting. No signature. None needed." Outside, the same sleek black car from last night idled at the curb. The driver, different from yesterday but cut from the same cloth, broad-shouldered and expressionless, opened the door without a word. I'd expected to find Alessio inside, perhaps with Marco. Instead, the back seat was empty, the leather as pristine as I remembered. "Where are we going?" I asked the driver after he'd pulled away from the curb. "Mr. Vitale's residence," came the curt reply. No further elaboration offered. We drove for nearly half an hour, leaving the cramped streets of my neighborhood behind, passing through the gleaming downtown, and finally turning into an exclusive enclave of estates set back from the road behind high walls and security gates. The leaves here seemed more vibrantly colored, as if autumn itself made more of an effort for the wealthy. The car slowed before an imposing iron gate flanked by stone columns. After a brief exchange with a security guard, we proceeded up a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees. The house, if such an understated word could apply to the sprawling mansion that came into view, was a masterpiece of modern architecture. All clean lines and vast windows reflecting the afternoon sun. "We're here," the driver announced unnecessarily as we pulled to a stop before wide stone steps. My mouth had gone dry, the reality of where I was and with whom I was about to spend the afternoon suddenly overwhelming. I could still ask to be taken home, could claim illness or a forgotten appointment. Before I could speak, the massive front door opened and little Marco appeared at the top of the steps. He wore dark jeans and a blue sweater that nearly matched my dress, his curls tamed somewhat from yesterday. When he spotted me through the car window, his solemn face brightened, and he waved tentatively. Any thought of retreat vanished. I stepped from the car and managed a smile that felt more genuine than I'd expected. "Hello, Marco," I called, climbing the steps to meet him. He didn't speak, but reached for my hand, his small fingers wrapping around mine with surprising strength, as if afraid I might disappear if he didn't hold on tight enough. "He's been watching for you since morning," came Alessio's voice from the doorway. Today he wore no suit jacket, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms and dark trousers. More casual, but no less commanding. His eyes swept over me, lingering on the blue dress before returning to my face. "You look lovely," he said. The words simple but delivered with an intensity that warmed my cheeks. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, defaulting to politeness to mask my uncertainty. His lips curved slightly. "It wasn't an invitation, Sophia. It was an inevitability. The statement should have alarmed me, its presumption, its confidence. Instead, a small thrill ran through me at the idea that this man had decided I was somehow necessary in his world. Marco tugged at my hand, drawing my attention back to him. He pointed inside, clearly eager to show me something. "Lead the way," I encouraged, allowing him to pull me past Alessio and into the house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior. Soaring ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than my entire life's earnings, furniture that managed to look both pristine and comfortable. But what struck me most was the warmth. I'd expected coldness, sterility, the kind of showplace that existed for admiration rather than living. Instead, there were books on side tables, a child's drawing framed alongside what appeared to be original artwork, soft throws draped over couches. Marco led me through the main living area and out onto a vast terrace overlooking manicured gardens that stretched to a distant tree line. In the center of the terrace stood an elaborate wooden playhouse, large enough for an adult to enter without stooping, painted a cheerful red with white trim. "Did you build this?" I asked, turning to find Alessio watching us from the doorway. "I had it made for him," he answered, stepping outside to join us. After his father died, he meant. After the boy's world collapsed. Marco released my hand and ran to the playhouse, disappearing inside only to reappear in the small window, gesturing emphatically for me to join him. "I think that's your cue," Alessio said, amusement warming his voice. I hesitated, looking down at my dress. "I'm not exactly dressed for playhouses." "I'll buy you another dress if that one gets dirty," he replied, as if replacing clothing was as simple as changing the channel on a television. Rather than argue, I made my way to the playhouse and carefully ducked inside. The interior was surprisingly spacious, furnished with child-sized furniture and shelves lined with toys and books. Marco sat cross-legged on a small rug, a box open before him. As I knelt beside him, he pulled out sheets of colored paper and held them up triumphantly. "You want me to make more cranes?" I guessed. He nodded vigorously. "Okay, but you have to help me." I selected a bright red sheet and began folding, narrating each step as I went, guiding his small hands through the process. After a few minutes, I became aware of Alessio watching us through the open door of the playhouse, his large frame filling the entrance. There was something vulnerable in his expression as he observed Marco's concentrated efforts, something that didn't align with the dangerous man Marco the manager had warned me about. "Join us," I invited, surprising myself with the boldness. "There's plenty of paper." He hesitated, then ducked inside, his presence immediately making the playhouse feel much smaller. He settled across from us, his long legs folded awkwardly, looking almost comically out of place among the child-sized furnishings. I handed him a sheet of black paper. "Have you ever made a paper crane?" "I have not had the pleasure," he admitted, taking the paper with careful fingers. For the next hour, we folded cranes of all colors, the pile growing between us. Marco proved to be a quick study, his tiny fingers becoming more confident with each attempt. Alessio was less adept, his large hands more suited to whatever activities had earned him his fearsome reputation, but he approached the task with surprising patience. When Marco finished his first successful crane without assistance, his face lit up with such pride that I felt my chest tighten. "That's perfect," I praised, watching as he carefully added it to our collection. "Thank you," Alessio said quietly, his eyes on me rather than the paper birds. "For this." The simple gratitude felt weighted with meaning I couldn't fully grasp. I nodded, unsure how to respond. A discreet cough from outside the playhouse broke the moment. A woman in a neat uniform stood on the terrace, hands clasped before her. "Lunch is served, Mr. Vitale," she announced. Alessio rose with surprising grace given the confined space. "Shall we?" Lunch was served in a sun-drenched breakfast room with views of the gardens. The food was simple but exquisite. Fresh bread, a variety of cheeses, cold meats, and a salad of greens I didn't recognize. Marco ate with surprising enthusiasm for a child, especially when Alessio sliced an apple into the shape of a rabbit for him. Throughout the meal, I found myself studying the dynamic between them. Alessio was clearly not accustomed to caring for a child, his movements sometimes tentative, his eyes often seeking confirmation that he was doing the right thing, but his attentiveness was absolute. Nothing Marco did seemed to escape his notice, from the boy's careful sorting of food on his plate to the way he swung his legs beneath the table. "How long has Marco been with you?" I asked as the boy focused on arranging cheese cubes into a pattern. Alessio's expression tightened slightly. 4 days, since the night his father was killed. "I'm sorry," I said, the words inadequate but sincere. "It must be a difficult adjustment, for both of you." He nodded, eyes fixed on Marco. "His father was one of my most trusted men. Giovanni was loyal from the beginning, when I had nothing but ambition and a name no one respected. His voice dropped lower. Meant only for me. He took 3 bullets meant for me. Died in my arms. The casual mention of violence should have shocked me more than it did. Instead, I found myself imagining Alessio holding a dying man, making promises about his son, shouldering a responsibility that most in his position might have delegated to others. And Marco's mother? Complications during childbirth 4 years ago. Giovanni raised him alone. Alessio's gaze returned to me, assessing. You're not asking the questions most would. What questions should I be asking? Who killed Giovanni? What business we were conducting when it happened? Whether you should be sitting at this table at all? I considered this as I sipped water from a crystal glass worth more than my weekly salary. Would you answer those questions if I asked them? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, then there's no point in asking, I replied simply. I'm here for Marco. Something flashed in his eyes, approval, perhaps, or relief. Of course. After lunch, Marco grew sleepy, the excitement of the morning catching up with him. Without prompting, I guided him to a plush sofa in a nearby sitting room, settling beside him with a children's book I'd spotted on the shelf. He curled against my side as I read, his eyelids growing heavier with each page until his breathing deepened into sleep. Alessio watched from the doorway, his posture relaxed, but his gaze intent. When he was certain Marco was asleep, he gestured for me to follow him. I carefully extracted myself from the sleeping child, arranging a soft throw over him before joining Alessio in an adjacent room, a study lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between us. He hasn't slept properly since it happened, Alessio said, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters caught the light. Nightmares. Crying for his father. He poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. Yet with you, he sleeps peacefully. He offered me one of the glasses. I hesitated, then accepted it, the crystal cool against my fingers. Children respond to consistency and kindness, I said. He's been through trauma. He needs stability. Is that what you studied before becoming a waitress? He asked, his tone making it clear he already knew the answer. Child psychology? Nursing, I corrected, though I never finished. Life got in the way. Your mother's illness, he stated rather than asked. He raised his glass slightly. To better days ahead, I froze, the glass halfway to my lips. How do you know about my mother? He held my gaze steadily, unapologetic. I make it my business to know everything about people who enter my life, Sophia. Especially those who enter Marco's life. A chill ran through me despite the warm sunlight. And what exactly do you know about me? Sophia Elena Martinez, 28 years old. Only child of Elena Martinez, currently receiving treatment for stage 3 pancreatic cancer at St. Mary's. Father unknown. Dropped out of nursing school in your final year when your mother was diagnosed. Working 2 jobs. Bellini's 5 nights a week and the convenience store on Mitchell Street weekend mornings. Behind on rent twice this year. Medical bills totaling just over $93,000, with a payment plan you're struggling to maintain. Each word felt like an invasion, laying bare the precarious scaffolding of my life. The glass trembled slightly in my hand as I set it down untouched. I swallowed hard. Thorough. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. I needed to know who was sitting across from Marco, who was making him smile for the first time in days. And now that you know? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Alessio moved closer, his presence filling the space between us. Now I know you're exactly who I thought you were. Someone who carries too many burdens alone. Someone who sees others before herself. Someone who makes paper cranes for crying children, even when her own world is falling apart. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face with surprising gentleness. I should have stepped back, maintained distance between us, but I remained still, caught in the gravity of his attention. What do you want from me, Alessio? I asked, the question barely above a whisper. His eyes held mine, dark and unreadable. Right now? I want you to come back tomorrow, and the day after. Marco needs you. The implication hung in the air between us. that it wasn't only Marco who needed me. I should have been afraid, should have seen the danger in becoming entangled with this man and his world. Instead, I felt something uncoil within me, something dangerously close to hope. And if I say no? The question was theoretical. We both knew I wouldn't. His lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I would send the car anyway, and you would come. You seem very certain of that. I am. He stepped closer still, close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. Because I saw your face when Marco fell asleep against you, because I know about the hospital bills. Because I understand what it means to protect what's yours at any cost. My heart hammered against my ribs as his words settled over me, their implication clear. A business proposition wrapped in the guise of childcare, my presence for his financial assistance. I won't be bought, I said, raising my chin defiantly. His eyes darkened. I'm not offering to buy you, Sophia. I'm offering you a choice. What choice? To help a child who needs you, to ease your mother's burden, to step into a world where you don't have to fight alone. He reached out again, this time his fingers trailing along my jaw, feather-light. All you have to do is say yes. In that moment, standing in the sunlight of his study, with his touch burning against my skin, I knew I stood at a crossroads. Behind me lay the life I'd always known. The struggle, the endless work, the fear of losing my mother. Ahead stretched something unknown, dangerous, possibly devastating, and yet... Yes, I whispered, the word escaping before I could reconsider. Something fierce and triumphant flashed in Alessio's eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. His hand cupped my cheek fully now, thumb brushing across my lower lip, in a touch so intimate it stole my breath. Good, he murmured. That's good, Sophia. From the next room came the sound of Marco stirring, a small whimper breaking the charged silence between us. Alessio's hand fell away as we both turned toward the sound. He's having a nightmare, I said, already moving toward the door. Alessio caught my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. Remember your choice, he said, his voice low and intense. Remember you said yes, as if I could forget, as if the word hadn't altered something fundamental in the universe the moment it left my lips. I nodded once, then pulled free to go to Marco, feeling Alessio's gaze on my back like a physical weight, possessive, calculating, and something else I wasn't ready to name. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm I never could have anticipated. Each day, the black car would appear precisely at noon, waiting to transport me from my world to Alessio's. Each day, Marco would be watching for my arrival, his small face lighting up when I stepped from the car. And each day, Alessio would observe our interactions with those intense, dark eyes, cataloging every smile I coaxed from the boy, every whispered word, every moment of connection. Marco was beginning to speak more, not full sentences yet, but words here and there, usually directed at me in private moments. Bird, when we folded paper cranes. Blue, when I wore his favorite color. Story, when he wanted me to read to him. Each utterance felt like a victory, one that Alessio acknowledged with subtle nods of approval that shouldn't have mattered to me but somehow did. True to his word, Alessio had eased my mother's burden. Though I hadn't asked how, I'd simply arrived at St. Mary's one morning to find her moved to a private room, with a specialist flown in from New York reviewing her case. When I'd questioned the head nurse, she'd merely smiled and mentioned an anonymous benefactor, with a knowing look that suggested it was anything but anonymous to the hospital administration. I should have protested, should have maintained my independence. Instead, watching the color gradually return to my mother's cheeks as the new treatment protocol took effect, I found my resistance crumbling. If the price for my mother's life was spending my afternoons with a solemn-eyed boy who needed me, and the dangerous man who watched us both like we were rare creatures he'd somehow captured, perhaps it wasn't too steep after all. Today, the mid-October air carried the first real bite of approaching winter. Marco and I sat in the garden, huddled under a thick blanket as we read his favorite story for perhaps the 20th time. He mouthed the words along with me, his head nestled against my shoulder, small fingers occasionally reaching up to trace the illustrations. He's becoming attached to you, Alessio's voice came from behind us. startling me. He moved like a shadow when he wanted to, appearing without warning. I glanced down at Marco, who had tensed slightly at Alessio's approach, but remained pressed against my side. Is that a problem? Alessio circled the bench to face us, his dark overcoat fluttering slightly in the breeze. Against the backdrop of autumn foliage, he looked like he'd stepped from the pages of some glossy magazine, all sharp angles and controlled power. No, he said after a moment's consideration, not yet. The qualification hung between us, heavy with implication. Not yet, but perhaps someday. Will you come inside? He asked, though as always the question felt perfunctory. There's something I wish to discuss. Marco clutched my hand as I moved to rise, his eyes suddenly anxious. I'll be right back, I assured him, smoothing his curls. Why don't you practice the next page? I want to hear you read it when I return. He nodded solemnly, accepting the book as I tucked the blanket more securely around his small form. Alessio watched this exchange with an expression I'd come to recognize, something between fascination and possessiveness, as if he couldn't quite determine if my ease with Marco pleased or concerned him. Inside, the house was warm and filled with the scent of something delicious cooking. Alessio led me not to his study as I expected, but to a small sitting room I'd never entered before. Unlike the grand formal spaces of the main house, this room felt personal, bookshelves overflowing with well-worn volumes, a leather chair shaped to someone's habitual sitting posture, photographs in simple frames. Your private space, I observed, taking in the details that spoke of the man rather than his position. He inclined his head slightly, neither confirming nor denying. Sit, please. I perched on the edge of a small sofa, hyper-aware of his presence as he remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, as he regarded me with that penetrating gaze. Marco's birthday is next week, he said finally. He'll be 5. I nodded, having already extracted this information from the boy during one of our drawing sessions. He mentioned it. He's quite excited about turning 5. Apparently it's when big boys get to start school. I smiled at the memory of his serious expression as he'd imparted this knowledge. Alessio's posture shifted subtly. Yes, about that. He moved to sit beside me on the sofa, close enough that our knees almost touched. I've been considering his education. He's bright, I offered. Quick with numbers and letters. He'll do well in school. Not traditional school, Alessio said, his tone making it clear this was non-negotiable. It's not safe. The reminder of who he was, of the dangers that presumably surrounded his position, sent a chill through me. Of course, a man like Alessio Vitale would have enemies. Of course, those enemies might target a child in his care. Private tutors, then? I suggested, thinking of the isolated life that would mean for Marco, already so alone in the world. Alessio nodded. For now. But he needs more than academic instruction. His eyes met mine, intent and serious. He needs consistency, stability, a maternal figure. My breath caught as I realized where this conversation was heading. Alessio, I want you to move in, he said, cutting off whatever protest I'd been about to make, to live here, with Marco, with me. The proposition hung in the air between us, breathtaking in its presumption. I have a life, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. An apartment. My mother. Your apartment lease is month to month. It expires in 2 weeks. Your mother's care is now fully covered at St. Mary's, where she can remain as long as necessary. Your manager at Bellini's has already been informed you won't be returning. Each statement hit like a physical blow, evidence of how thoroughly he'd mapped out my life, how completely he'd assumed control of my future. You had no right, I whispered, anger flaring hot and sudden. Those aren't your decisions to make. His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Not regret exactly, but perhaps recognition that he'd miscalculated. I removed obstacles, made things simpler. Simpler for whom? I stood abruptly, needing distance between us. You can't just rearrange people's lives because it suits your purposes, Alessio. I can, he replied, his voice soft but unyielding. I do. Every day. Of course he did. That was who he was. A man who controlled not just businesses or territories but people, their fates, their futures. Not mine, I said, though even to my own ears, the protest sounded hollow. Hadn't I already allowed him to take over the most critical aspects of my existence? My mother's care, my financial burdens. He rose to stand before me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Marco needs you, Sophia. Here. With him. His hand rose to cup my cheek, the gesture becoming familiar in a way that should have alarmed me. I need you here. The admission, so plainly stated, so matter of fact, knocked the air from my lungs. In 2 weeks, he'd never expressed any personal desire beyond my usefulness to Marco. Had never indicated that his interest extended beyond the boy's welfare. What exactly are you offering me? I asked, forcing myself to hold his gaze despite the heat climbing my neck. His thumb traced the curve of my cheekbone, featherlight, security, comfort, a place where you belong. His voice dropped lower, where you're valued. As what? Marco's nanny? Your employee? The questions came sharp with defensiveness. Another acquisition? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. As whatever you choose to be, Sophia, but here, with us. The ambiguity of the offer hung between us, laden with unspoken possibilities. I stepped back, needing to break the spell of his proximity, the hypnotic quality of his voice promising things I hadn't allowed myself to want. I need time, I said, to think, to talk to my mother. He nodded once, as if he'd expected this response. The car will take you to see her now, if you wish. Outside, Marco still waited on the bench, the book clutched to his chest, his face brightening when he saw me return. I knelt before him, adjusting his scarf against the cooling air. I have to go see my mother, I explained gently, but I'll be back tomorrow just like always. His small brow furrowed. Promise? The word, so clear, so perfectly articulated, caught me by surprise. I glanced up at Alessio, who stood watching us, his expression unreadable. I promise, I assured Marco, drawing him into a quick hug. Be good for Alessio, okay? He nodded solemnly, his eyes darting between me and Alessio as if trying to decipher the tension that stretched invisible but palpable between us. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. By the time I reached my mother's room, I'd worked myself into a state of righteous indignation over Alessio's presumption, his casual rearrangement of my life without consultation. I'd rehearsed a dozen different ways to refuse his offer, each more eloquent than the last. All my prepared speeches evaporated when I saw my mother sitting up in bed, color in her cheeks, a book open on her lap, looking more like herself than she had in months. "Sophia!" she exclaimed, her smile brightening the sterile room. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." I crossed to her bedside, taking her hand in mine, marveling at the strength in her grip. "You look wonderful, Mom." "I feel wonderful," she agreed, her eyes crinkling with genuine happiness. "Dr. Harrison says the new treatment is working better than they hoped. The tumor is already shrinking." Relief washed through me, so powerful I had to sit on the edge of the bed. That's amazing news. "It's a miracle," she corrected, squeezing my hand. "Just like your mysterious benefactor." I stiffened slightly. "What do you mean?" Her eyes, so like mine, studied my face with the perception that had always made hiding anything from her impossible. "The hospital administrator came by yesterday. Said all our bills have been paid in full. That any treatment I need, for as long as I need it, is covered." She tilted her head. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I looked down at our joined hands, unsure how to explain what I barely understood myself. "I've met someone," I said finally, echoing my words from weeks ago. "Someone powerful." "The interesting man," she recalled, her expression thoughtful. "And he's helping us." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "He has a little boy, a child he's caring for. He wants me to help with him, to live in his house." I expected shock, concern, all the natural reactions a mother should have to such a proposition. Instead, She studied me with careful consideration. And what does he want in return, this powerful man? The question cut to the heart of my own confusion. I don't know, I admitted. He says he wants me there for Marco. That's the boy. But it's more than that. I can feel it when he looks at me, I trailed off, heat rising in my cheeks. My mother's eyes softened with understanding. When he touches you, I nodded, unable to articulate the electricity that sparked whenever Alessio's skin made contact with mine. The way his gaze seemed to burn through layers of pretense to see something in me I couldn't name myself. Is he kind to you, Sophia? She asked simply. The question gave me pause. Kindness wasn't the first word I'd associate with Alessio Vitale. He was intense, demanding, presumptuous. But cruel? Harsh? No. Yes, I said finally. In his way. And the boy? Do you care for him? Marco is... I smiled despite myself, thinking of his solemn eyes lighting up when I arrived each day. He's wonderful. He's been through so much, and he's still so gentle, so eager to love and be loved. My mother nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Then perhaps this is where you're meant to be, sweetheart. But we don't even know who this man really is, I protested. What he does, where his money comes from. She gave me a knowing look. I think you have some idea, and you're still here, still considering his offer. Her thumb stroked the back of my hand. Sometimes life offers us unexpected paths, Sophia. Sometimes the right choice isn't the safe one or the conventional one. What if I'm making a terrible mistake? I whispered, voicing my deepest fear. What if you're not? She countered gently. What if this is exactly where you're supposed to be? With this man and his boy who both need you in different ways. I left the hospital an hour later with no more clarity than when I'd arrived, my mother's parting words echoing in my mind. Follow your heart, Sophia. It's never led you astray before. The problem was, my heart seemed as conflicted as my head, pulled between self-preservation and the undeniable connection I felt to both Marco and, increasingly, to Alessio himself. The black car was waiting when I emerged from the hospital, the driver holding the door open without comment. I slid into the back seat, expecting to be taken to my apartment, but as we pulled away from the curb, I realized we were heading in the opposite direction. Where are we going? I asked, leaning forward. Mr. Vitale's residence, the driver replied, his tone suggesting this should have been obvious. The boy won't sleep. He's asking for you. Concern immediately overrode my lingering irritation with Alessio's high-handedness. Is Marco all right? Is he sick? Nightmares, I believe. The driver's eyes met mine briefly in the rearview mirror. He won't calm down for anyone else. My heart contracted at the thought of Marco frightened and crying, calling for me. Whatever complex emotions I harbored toward Alessio, the boy himself had claimed a piece of my heart I hadn't intended to give. Night had fallen completely by the time we reached the estate, the house ablaze with lights. I barely waited for the car to stop before I was out the door, hurrying up the steps. The front door opened before I could reach it, Alessio himself standing in the entrance, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, tie loosened, hair mussed as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. "Thank you for coming," he said, the words carrying an unfamiliar weight. Not an order or a statement, but genuine gratitude. "Where is he?" I asked, already moving past him into the house. "Upstairs. Second door on the left. His bedroom." Alessio fell into step beside me. "He woke screaming about an hour ago. Won't let anyone near him. Keeps calling for you." I took the stairs 2 at a time, my concern for Marco overriding any awareness of the significance of entering the private family wing of the house. Outside his bedroom door, I paused, hearing the muffled sounds of crying within. "Marco," I called softly, pushing the door open. "It's Sophia. I'm here." The room was dimly lit by a small lamp, revealing a space decorated in blues and greens, with stars painted on the ceiling that glowed faintly in the semi-darkness. Marco sat huddled in the center of a bed that seemed far too large for his small frame, knees drawn up to his chest, face tear-streaked and pale. When he saw me, he let out a small, wounded sound and reached out with both arms. I crossed to him immediately, gathering him against me as I settled on the edge of the bed. He clung to my neck, his whole body trembling with the force of his silent tears. "Shh, it's okay," I murmured, stroking his back in slow, soothing circles. "I'm here now. You're safe." Marco's small body gradually relaxed against mine, his breathing slowing as the worst of his terror subsided. I continued to hold him, murmuring soft reassurances into his curls, acutely aware of Alessio watching from the doorway. His presence filled the room even in silence, a gravitational force impossible to ignore. "Bad dream," Marco whispered against my neck, the words muffled but clear enough. "I know, sweetheart," I soothed, pulling back just enough to see his face. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He shook his head, eyes downcast, fingers clutching the fabric of my dress. "Sometimes talking about bad dreams makes them less scary," I suggested gently, like shining a light on shadows. Marco considered this, his brow furrowed in that serious way that made him seem far older than his nearly 5 years. Finally, in a voice barely audible, he said, "Papa was calling for me, but I couldn't find him." My heart constricted at the simple admission. I glanced up at Alessio, finding his expression carefully controlled, though something raw flickered in his eyes before he masked it. "That is scary," I acknowledged, brushing Marco's curls from his forehead. "But you know what? Your papa would be so proud of how brave you're being, and he'd want you to know that you're not alone. You have Alessio looking after you." I hesitated, then added softly, "And you have me." Marco's eyes, so dark and solemn, searched my face. "Always?" The question, laden with all the weight of a child's absolute trust, stole my breath. I was acutely aware of Alessio shifting in the doorway, his attention sharpening. "I'll be here whenever you need me," I promised, carefully avoiding the absolute that Marco sought, but that I wasn't certain I could guarantee. It seemed to satisfy him. He nestled back against me, his small hand finding mine. "Stay until I sleep?" "Of course." I settled more comfortably on the bed, letting him curl against my side as I began to hum a lullaby my own mother had sung to me throughout childhood. Alessio remained in the doorway, a silent sentinel, until Marco's breathing deepened into sleep. Only then did he approach, moving with that predatory grace that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "You're good with him," he observed, voice pitched low to avoid waking the boy. "He makes it easy," I replied, carefully extracting myself from Marco's grip and tucking the blankets around his small form. "He just needs security, consistency, things I've been unable to provide alone," Alessio admitted, surprising me with the vulnerability in the statement. I straightened, finding myself suddenly close to him in the dimly lit room, close enough to see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, to catch the scent of expensive cologne mingled with something uniquely him. "You're doing your best," I said, meaning it despite my lingering frustration with his methods. "Taking in a child, especially one who's experienced trauma. It's not easy for anyone." His eyes held mine, searching. "And yet you manage it effortlessly." "Not effortlessly," I corrected. I understand what it's like to be afraid and not know if things will be okay." Something shifted in his expression. A softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips. "Come," he said after a moment. "He'll sleep now. We should talk." He led me downstairs, not to his study or the formal rooms where we usually spent time, but to the kitchen. A vast, gleaming space that somehow managed to feel warm despite its professional-grade appliances and marble countertops. To my surprise, no staff lingered here at this hour. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to one of the stools at the large island. "Are you hungry?" The question, so mundane after the emotional intensity upstairs, caught me off guard. Yes, actually. I haven't eaten since lunch." Alessio nodded and moved to the refrigerator with unexpected familiarity, pulling out ingredients with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything was kept. "You cook?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. His lips curved in what might have been amusement. "I wasn't always—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Who I am now. Before, there were many nights when cooking for myself was necessary." He set a pan on the stove with practiced ease. Besides, some skills are worth maintaining, regardless of circumstances. I watched in fascination as Alessio Vitale, the man who reportedly controlled half the city's underworld, efficiently prepared a simple pasta dish, his movements economical and precise. There was something oddly intimate about witnessing this domestic side of him, as if I'd been granted access to a version of himself he rarely revealed. "My mother likes your doctors," I said when the silence between us grew too weighted. "She's responding well to the treatment." He nodded, not looking up from the sizzling pan. "Dr. Harrison is the best in his field. I made sure of it." "Thank you," I said quietly. "Whatever else is between us, I'm grateful for that." He glanced at me then, something unreadable in his expression. "You shouldn't have to be grateful for what should be a basic right. Healthcare, security, the chance to care for family without destroying yourself in the process." The statement carried unexpected passion, a glimpse perhaps of the ideology that drove him. "Is that how you see what you do?" I asked carefully. "Providing what should be rights but aren't?" His hands stilled momentarily over the stove. "What I do," he said eventually, "is protect what's mine, ensure that those under my care want for nothing." He resumed cooking, adding herbs to the pan with meticulous attention. "The systems in place, legal, financial, medical, they're designed to benefit those who already have power. I simply redistribute that benefit where I see fit." It was a diplomatic answer, carefully sidestepping the illegal aspects of his empire that we both knew existed. Still, I found myself wondering if there wasn't some truth to it. If the man before me, beneath the dangerous reputation and calculated control, might genuinely believe in a warped version of justice. He served the pasta in simple ceramic bowls, sliding one across the island to me along with a glass of red wine I hadn't noticed him pour. "Eat," he said, taking the stool beside me rather than across the island, close enough that our knees nearly touched. "Then we'll discuss what happens next." The pasta was unexpectedly delicious. Simple but perfectly seasoned, the sauce clinging to each strand in a way that spoke of skill rather than chance. We ate in companionable silence for several minutes, the domestic normality of the scene almost surreal, given the circumstances that had brought us together. "Marco asked if I would stay always," I said finally, setting down my fork. I didn't know how to answer him, Alessio's dark eyes fixed on mine. "And yet you need to, Sophia, for his sake, and yours." "My sake?" I raised an eyebrow. "How exactly does moving into your house benefit me, beyond the financial arrangements you've already made without my consent?" A flash of something, irritation, perhaps, crossed his features. "Safety," he said simply. "Protection. From what?" He set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "There are people who would use any connection to me as leverage, any weakness." His gaze intensified. "You've become such a connection. The longer you remain in your apartment, traveling back and forth, the greater the risk." A chill ran through me despite the kitchen's warmth. "Are you saying I'm in danger because I've been spending time with Marco, with you?" "I'm saying precautions are necessary." His hand moved to cover mine on the countertop, his touch warm and unexpectedly gentle. "I protect what's mine, Sophia." There it was again. That possessive claim that should have offended me, but instead sent a thrill of something dangerous coursing through my veins. "I'm not yours," I said, the protest sounding weak even to my own ears. His thumb traced small circles on the inside of my wrist, just over my pulse point. "Aren't you?" The question came soft, almost tender. "You've been in my house every day for 2 weeks. You've cared for Marco as if he were your own. You've accepted my help with your mother." His eyes held mine, unflinching. "Lines have blurred, Sophia, boundaries crossed. The only question now is whether you'll acknowledge what's already happened or continue pretending otherwise." Heat climbed my neck at his blunt assessment. The worst part was that I couldn't deny it. Couldn't pretend I hadn't felt the subtle shift in my relationship not just with Marco, but with Alessio himself, the way his gaze followed me through rooms, the increasing frequency of his casual touches, the charge in the air whenever we found ourselves alone. "And if I agree to move in," I asked, forcing myself to maintain eye contact, "what exactly would be expected of me?" "To continue as you have been with Marco," he answered immediately. "To provide the stability and care he needs." He paused, his expression growing more intense. As for us, his fingers tightened slightly around mine. I would expect honesty, loyalty, and the acknowledgement of what's growing between us, whatever form that might take. The candor of his response stole my breath. No pretty lies or false pretenses, just the naked truth of what he wanted, laid bare for my acceptance or rejection. I barely know you, I whispered, though the protest sounded hollow even to my own ears. How could that be true when I'd spent every day in his home, witnessed his care for Marco, felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch? You know enough, he countered. You know I honor my commitments, that I protect what matters to me, that I can give you and your mother security you've never known. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. And you know there's something between us that neither of us expected, but both of us feel. My heart hammered against my ribs, his words giving voice to the undercurrent that had run beneath our every interaction. And if I say no, if I walk away, his expression tightened, something dangerous flashing in his eyes before he controlled it. Your mother's care would continue regardless. I don't withdraw my protection once given. He released my hand, creating space between us. But Marco would suffer, as would you, I think. The implicit threat in the first statement was overshadowed by the raw honesty in the second. He wasn't trying to coerce me with financial leverage. That would have been simpler, cleaner in its manipulation. Instead, he was offering a truth I couldn't easily dismiss. That walking away would hurt not just Marco, but me as well. I need to think, I said, pushing back from the island. This isn't a small decision. Alessio nodded, his expression once again carefully controlled. The guest room has been prepared for you tonight. Marco will want you here in the morning. He rose with fluid grace. Take whatever time you need to consider. But know that my offer won't change, all of it, or none. Is everything a negotiation to you? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. His lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everything worth having requires terms, Sophia. I'm simply being transparent about mine. He showed me to a guest suite that put my entire apartment to shame. All soft blues and creams, with a bed that looked cloud-soft, and a bathroom bigger than my living room. Fresh clothes had been laid out on a chair. Not my clothes, but new ones that would fit perfectly, I had no doubt. How long have you been planning this? I asked, taking in the evidence of premeditation around me. Since the night you made a paper crane for a crying boy, he admitted without shame. Some things are inevitable, Sophia. This, us, was always going to happen from that first moment. The certainty in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, I found myself wondering if he might be right. If the path that had led me here had been set in motion the moment I knelt beside Marco's chair at Bellini's. Good night, Alessio, I said, needing distance to sort through the tangle of emotions his proximity evoked. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that sent heat spiraling through me. Sleep well, Sophia. We'll talk more tomorrow. Alone in the lavish guest room, I found sleep elusive despite the comfort surrounding me. My mind raced with the implications of Alessio's offer, with the undeniable attraction I felt toward him despite, or perhaps because of, the danger he represented, with my growing attachment to Marco and his to me. Dawn was breaking when I finally made my decision, the first pale light filtering through gauzy curtains as I acknowledged what I think I'd known all along. I couldn't walk away from Marco. From the sense of purpose I'd found in caring for him. From the undeniable connection that had formed between Alessio and me, complex and potentially dangerous as it might be. When I emerged from the guest room, dressed in the clothes that had been provided and fit as perfectly as I'd expected, Alessio was waiting in the hallway. One look at my face, and he knew. Yes, I said simply, before he could speak. But I have conditions of my own. Something like triumph flashed in his eyes, quickly masked behind careful control. Name them. My mother visits here when she's well enough. I maintain my independence, my own bank accounts, my own transportation if I need it. And I want to know what you do, no pretty euphemisms or vague explanations. If I'm stepping into this world, I need to understand what it really is. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he inclined his head in agreement. Done. All of it. Just like that? His lips curved in that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. Just like that. Did you expect more resistance? Honestly? Yes. He stepped closer, one hand rising to cup my cheek with now familiar intimacy. I told you, Sophia. I protect what's mine. Your conditions don't threaten that. They strengthen it. An alliance built on truth and mutual respect is far stronger than one built on false pretenses or coercion. Is that what this is? An alliance? His thumb brushed across my lower lip, sending shivers through me. For now, he murmured. Though I think we both know it's becoming much more. Before I could respond, Marco's bedroom door opened, and he emerged, sleep-rumpled and wide-eyed at finding us both in the hallway. Sophia? He questioned, rubbing his eyes as if to confirm I wasn't a dream. You stayed. I knelt to his level, opening my arms as he ran to me. I stayed, I confirmed, holding him close. Over his head, my eyes met Alessio's, finding something warm and possessive in his gaze as he watched us embrace. And I'm going to keep staying, I added, the words a promise to Marco and an acknowledgement to Alessio of the choice I'd made. For better or worse, I was stepping fully into their world. Marco pulled back, his small face alight with more joy than I'd seen since we met. Forever. This time, I didn't hedge or qualify. For as long as you need me. Alessio's hand settled on my shoulder, warm and solid, claiming, protecting, connecting. Come, he said, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. Let's have breakfast. We have much to plan. As we descended the stairs, Marco's hand in mine and Alessio close behind us, I felt the strangest sensation of pieces falling into place. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, nowhere close to the future I'd planned. It was dangerous, uncertain, built on foundations I didn't fully understand. And yet, walking between these two damaged, complex people who had somehow become essential to me, I couldn't help feeling that perhaps I'd finally found where I belonged. 3 months passed like a dream, or perhaps like waking from one. My small apartment was packed up, my meager possessions looking almost embarrassed when placed within the grandeur of Alessio's mansion. My mother continued to improve under Dr. Harrison's care, well enough now to visit once a week for Sunday dinners, where Marco would proudly show off his latest achievements. My old life receded like a tide, leaving behind only the essential pieces, my relationship with my mother, a few cherished books and photographs, memories that grew more distant with each passing day. In their place came new rhythms, new certainties, mornings with Marco, guiding him through the lessons his tutors had prepared, afternoons in the garden or library, reading stories or creating elaborate adventures with the toys that arrived in seemingly endless supply. And evenings belonged to Alessio. True to his word, he had answered my questions about his business with unflinching honesty. Yes, parts of it were illegal, gambling, protection, certain imports that bypassed taxation. No, he did not deal in drugs or human trafficking, lines he considered uncrossable. Yes, violence was sometimes necessary, though he preferred the leverage of information and financial pressure. No, he did not enjoy causing pain, but neither did he hesitate when his position required it. The world operates on power, he'd explained one night as we sat in his study, the fire casting dancing shadows across his features, those who have it and those who serve them. I simply chose not to serve. I should have been repelled by these admissions. Instead, I found myself understanding the brutal logic of his choices, the code of honor that guided actions others might view as criminal. He protected his people fiercely. He kept his word absolutely. He valued loyalty above all else. And somehow, improbably, I had become part of that inner circle. Someone he protected. Someone whose opinion he sought. Someone he watched with those dark, intent eyes that missed nothing. Marco thrived under our shared care. The nightmares decreased, then stopped altogether. He spoke freely now, his vocabulary expanding daily, his laughter filling rooms that had once seemed too formal for joy. He called Alessio Uncle Alessio, and me simply Sophia, though sometimes when half asleep or frightened, Mama would slip out. a word that never failed to send a complicated surge of emotion through me. Today was Marco's birthday, his 5th, and the house hummed with quiet activity as staff prepared for the small celebration we'd planned. No other children would attend, security concerns made that impossible. But Alessio had arranged for a magician who had performed for royalty, a cake crafted by a pastry chef flown in from Paris, and gifts that had been arriving for weeks from Alessio's associates around the world. I stood in Marco's bedroom, helping him dress in the new outfit he'd selected with such seriousness. Navy blue pants and a crisp white shirt that made him look heartbreakingly grown up. "Do I look handsome?" he asked, turning before the mirror with a gravity that made my heart clench. "The handsomest," I assured him, kneeling to straighten his collar. "Your papa would be so proud of you." His small face grew solemn at the mention of his father. "Uncle Alessio says Papa is watching from heaven. Do you think he can see my party?" I swallowed past the tightness in my throat. "I think he can see everything wonderful that you do, and I think he's smiling right now." Marco nodded, accepting this with the simple faith of childhood. Then, with the resilience that continually amazed me, his expression brightened. "Is Nonna Elena coming today?" Nonna Elena was what he'd taken to calling my mother, a title she adored. "She is," I confirmed. "And she has a special present for you." His eyes widened. "What is it?" "If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it?" I tapped his nose gently. "Now, let's go downstairs. I think Uncle Alessio is waiting for us." We found Alessio in the main living room, deep in conversation with 2 men I recognized as part of his inner circle. He broke off mid-sentence when he saw us, his expression softening in the way it always did when Marco entered a room. "There he is," he said, opening his arms as Marco ran to him. "The birthday boy." The men nodded respectfully to me as they left, still a strange experience after months in Alessio's world. I'd come to understand the hierarchy within his organization, the complex web of loyalties and obligations that bound dozens of people to him. And I'd come to understand my own position within that web, respected because Alessio respected me, protected because he had claimed me as his own. "Everything is ready?" I asked, as Alessio lifted Marco into his arms. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine over Marco's head. "Everything, though there's been a slight change of plans." Something in his tone made me pay closer attention. "We'll discuss it later." I understood the message. Business had intruded. Something requiring Alessio's attention had arisen. It happened occasionally, these reminders that the peaceful life we'd constructed rested on foundations that were anything but peaceful. The party unfolded beautifully, despite whatever shadow lurked at its edges. My mother arrived, looking healthier than she had in years, bearing a handmade quilt she'd been working on for weeks during her hospital stays. Marco was delighted with the magician, gasping and clapping at each illusion. The cake was a masterpiece of chocolate and spun sugar that seemed too beautiful to eat, though Marco had no such reservations. Throughout it all, Alessio remained attentive and engaged, but I noticed the subtle signs of tension, the way his eyes periodically scanned the room, the slight stiffness in his shoulders, the occasional murmured conversation with the security personnel who maintained a discreet presence around the perimeter of the celebration. As the afternoon waned and Marco began to flag, worn out from excitement and sugar, my mother offered to read him stories while he rested. I helped settle them in the library. Marco curled against her side as she opened one of his favorite books. "He's wonderful, Sophia," she murmured as I adjusted a blanket over them both. "So full of life." "He is," I agreed, my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. Watching them together, my mother and this child who had somehow become mine without blood or law to make it so, filled me with a fierce protectiveness I'd never experienced before. "And Alessio?" she asked, her perceptive eyes missing nothing. "How are things there?" I glanced toward the door, though I knew Alessio was elsewhere, handling whatever situation had arisen. "Complicated," I admitted. "But good, I think. We're finding our way." The truth was more nuanced than I could express. Alessio and I had developed something that defied easy categorization, deeper than friendship, charged with an attraction neither of us acted upon, but both acknowledged. Bound by our shared care for Marco, and the strange intimacy of living within the same walls. There had been moments, his hand lingering on mine as he passed a glass of wine, his eyes holding mine across rooms, conversations that stretched late into the night, revealing pieces of ourselves neither of us had shared before. But always, he maintained a careful distance, never pushing beyond the boundaries of what I seemed ready to give. "Be careful with your heart," my mother advised, though her tone held no judgment. "But don't be afraid to use it either." I kissed her cheek, then Marco's forehead, leaving them to their stories as I went in search of Alessio. I found him in his study, phone pressed to his ear, tension evident in the hard line of his jaw. When he saw me, he concluded the call abruptly. "Is everything all right?" I asked, closing the door behind me. He moved to the sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid before answering. "There's been a development," he said finally, handing me one of the glasses, "concerning Giovanni's killers." Giovanni, Marco's father. In 3 months, this was the first concrete mention of the people responsible for his death, though I knew Alessio had been hunting them with cold, patient determination. "You found them?" I asked, the glass cool against my suddenly warm palm. "Yes." The single word contained volumes. Satisfaction, rage, the promise of retribution. "What happens now?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart raced with implications. Alessio studied me, perhaps gauging how much to share, how much I could bear to know. "Justice," he said finally. "My kind, not the law's." This simple statement should have horrified me. 3 months ago, it might have. Now, thinking of Marco's nightmares, of the life stolen from him, of the father he would never see again, I found I could not summon the appropriate moral outrage. "When?" I asked instead. "Tonight." He set his glass down, moving closer to me. "I'll be gone for a few hours. The house will be secure. Extra men on the perimeter, all the usual protocols." I nodded, understanding now the tension I'd observed throughout the day. "Will it be—" I hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question. "Dangerous?" he supplied, his expression softening slightly. "No. The hard work was finding them. The rest is formality." A euphemism for execution, I knew. Though neither of us would say it aloud, this was the reality of the world I'd entered. Blood and power and justice delivered without courts or juries. "Marco had a wonderful birthday," I said, changing the subject to something safer, something we both cherished. "He loved the telescope especially." Alessio's expression warmed at the mention of the boy. "He has your curiosity, your kindness, and your determination," I added with a small smile. "Yesterday, he spent 3 hours trying to build a tower with those blocks, refusing to give up even when it fell 20 times. Something shifted in Alessio's gaze as he looked at me, a softening, an intensity that made my breath catch. "You've given him something I couldn't, Sophia. A mother's heart." The words echoed his statement from that first night at the restaurant, but now weighted with months of shared experiences, with the reality of what we had become to each other, to Marco. "I love him," I said simply. It was the first time I'd stated it so plainly, though we both had known it for weeks, as if he were my own. Alessio moved closer still, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the now familiar scent of his cologne mingled with something uniquely him. "And me?" he asked, his voice dropping to a register that sent shivers through me. "What am I to you, Sophia?" The question hung between us, charged with all the unspoken moments of the past months, all the careful boundaries we'd maintained while living in such intimate proximity. "You know," I whispered, unable to find the words for the complex tangle of emotions he evoked in me. Fear and fascination, respect and wariness, desire and something dangerously close to love. His hand rose to cup my cheek, the gesture now familiar but no less potent for its repetition. "I need to hear it," he said, his thumb brushing across my lower lip. "Before I leave tonight, before I do what must be done." Understanding dawned. He needed absolution, or perhaps benediction, needed to know that whatever darkness he carried, whatever violence he would enact in the name of justice and protection, I would still be here when he returned. That I had chosen this life, this world, this man, with my eyes open to all he was. You are... I swallowed hard, searching for truth. Everything I never expected. The man who saved my mother's life, who gave Marco a home, who looked at me and saw something worth claiming. My hand rose to cover his where it rested against my cheek. You are terrible and wonderful, Alessio, dangerous and safe. And I... The words caught in my throat, too enormous to voice aloud. Say it, he urged, his eyes never leaving mine. Please. I love you, I whispered, the admission tearing from me like something physical. God help me. I love all of you. The darkness and the light. The man who orders executions, and the one who reads bedtime stories to a boy who isn't his by blood, but is his in every way that matters. Something fierce and triumphant blazed in his eyes. Before I could draw another breath, his mouth claimed mine in a kiss that felt like possession, like coming home, like the inevitable conclusion to a story that had been written from the moment I knelt beside a crying child with a paper crane. His arms encircled me, drawing me against the solid warmth of his chest as the kiss deepened. Months of restrained desire unleashed in a single moment. I clutched at his shoulders, anchoring myself as the world seemed to tilt beneath my feet, lost in the sensation of finally crossing the line we'd been approaching since that first night. When he pulled back, we were both breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine, his hands spanning my waist as if unwilling to release me completely. When I return tonight, he said, his voice rough with emotion, we'll talk about the future, about making permanent what we've built here. You, me, Marco, a family bound by choice rather than blood. The implication stole my breath, a proposal, or the prelude to one, a formalizing of what had grown between us over these months, unexpected and undeniable. I'll be waiting, I promised, understanding now that this had always been our destination, from the moment he said those fateful words in the restaurant. He needs a mother's love. Hours later, with Marco sleeping peacefully in his room, and my mother settled in the guest suite she now regularly occupied, I waited in Alessio's study, watching the fire burn low in the grate. I didn't ask for details when he returned shortly after midnight, his expression grim but satisfied, a weight seemingly lifted from his shoulders. He simply came to me, kneeling before the chair where I sat, taking my hands in his. It's done, he said quietly. Giovanni has justice, Marco has safety, and now... He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Now we secure our future, all of us. The ring inside was not what I might have expected from a man of Alessio's resources and taste, not a massive diamond designed to showcase wealth and power. Instead, it was an elegant emerald, surrounded by smaller diamonds, vintage and distinctive. It was my grandmother's, he explained, watching my face carefully. The only woman in my family who showed me kindness, who believed I could be more than the circumstances of my birth. It's beautiful, I whispered, understanding the significance of such a personal offering from a man who guarded his past so carefully. Will you wear it? He asked. And for the first time since I'd known him, I heard uncertainty in Alessio Vitali's voice. Will you be my wife, Sophia? Marco's mother in truth as well as heart? The question needed no consideration. I had made my choice months ago, had reaffirmed it with each day I remained. With each piece of my heart I gave to the solemn-eyed boy who called me Mama in unguarded moments. With each layer of Alessio I discovered and came to love despite, or perhaps because of, the complexity I found. Yes, I said simply, watching as he slid the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit that seemed somehow symbolic of how seamlessly I had found my place in this unexpected life. He rose, drawing me to my feet and into his arms. I will protect you, he vowed, the words carrying the weight of an oath. You and Marco and any children we might have. I will give you everything within my power to give. I know, I murmured against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. And I will love you, all of you, the darkness and the light. I will be Marco's mother, your wife, the keeper of this home we've built. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the estate in a blanket of pristine white. transforming the world as completely as my life had been transformed since that fateful night at Bellini's. Tomorrow, Marco would wake to find his two favorite people engaged to be married, his family secured at last. Tomorrow, we would begin planning a future I could never have imagined for myself. But tonight, in the circle of Alessio's arms, I found the resolution to a story that had begun with a paper crane and a crying child, a dangerous man who needed someone to love his boy, and a waitress with enough heart to love them both.